Hey friends, Matt aka Martil here, and in this video I want to show you a few cool ways that you can use a phaser to add movement to basically any type of sound in your track, whether that's a lead sound, a pad sound, a bass sound, or even drums or percussion sounds. First up, for those of you that don't know, a phaser is basically an audio effect that just creates a series of spaced notch filters across the frequency spectrum of a sound. However, as opposed to something like a flanger, these notch filters are not harmonically spaced. Instead, we can kind of space them along the frequency spectrum effectively however we'd like. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so here I just have some basic white noise. Let's take a look at this through a spectrum analyzer, and we can see that it's just flat across the whole frequency spectrum. Let's add Ableton Live's phaser flanger effect to this sound just before the spectrum analyzer, and open up the spectrum again. And now let's take a listen to what this does to the sound, as well as look at how it affects the frequency spectrum of this sound. We can see those series of dips or notches moving along the frequency spectrum at a certain rate. And in fact, we can see this represented on the phaser flanger interface itself. We can see these 4 different lines here on this kind of frequency spectrum, and these represent where those 4 different notches are in the spectrum. We can adjust the movement of these notches by slowing down the rate. We can adjust the amount of movement by slowing down the amount control, and we could even adjust, say, the center frequency of these notches, or the number of notches with this notches control here. And there we can see those 2 notches on the frequency spectrum, not spaced in any harmonically related way, just kind of spaced wherever we've placed them. So now that we know what a phaser sounds like and kind of what it does, let's take a look at one in action on a few different sounds. First up, I've got just a simple pad sound here. So to give this sound a little bit more movement, let's add a phaser just after this wavetable here and have a listen again to what this just does right out of the gate. So for a sound like this, we might want to, for instance, slow down the rate here. I could go to this rate control, slow it down a little bit. So maybe it's 8 bars instead of 2 bars. Reduce the amount here, so reducing the depth of the movement of this LFO. I could change the center frequency of these notches, and I could maybe also change the shape of this movement from a triangle wave here to something like a sine wave. And once I have a kind of phasery sound that I like, I can go down to the dry wet control and just reduce the dry wet level here so that we can just blend this sound or effect in subtly rather than having it take over the whole sound. So without the phaser, and with the phaser. You can hear how that's immediately added some more interest to the sound. Let's take a look at this same concept except applied to a lead sound and add in a few extra parameters to add even more interest and movement to the sound. So here I've got a simple lead sound just playing a really basic melody, sounds like this. Let's go ahead and add a phaser to this sound once again. And let's do a very similar thing to what we just did to the pad sound. Let's reduce the amount here. Let's maybe increase the rate so it's at 1 bar instead. And maybe we can increase the number of notches from 4 to 6. Reduce the center frequency a little bit, and then maybe change the LFO shape from triangle to something like triangle analog. Let's add some even more interest and movement to this sound by playing around with some other parameters. So we could change the spread or the spacing of these notches on the frequency spectrum with this spread control here. We can add in some blend, which adds the LFO movement to not just the center frequency, but also this spread. So these notches start moving apart and together, as well as moving up and down across the frequency spectrum. And then we can also add some offset to the left and the right LFOs in this phaser by increasing this phase control here, so we can have some different movement going on in the left and the right speakers. Lastly, we can actually add some feedback to this phaser, which basically just increases the intensity of this phaser effect and adds a little bit of longevity and length to the sound, kind of giving it a bit of a metallic feeling. We can do this with feedback control right here. Let's increase this and have a listen. And if we want, we can even try inverting the polarity of the fedback signal if your phaser allows you to do this with this little polarity control right next to the feedback control. We can even add some more interesting movement by blending in a second LFO with Ableton Live's phaser here by increasing the LFO2 mix and maybe slowing down the LFO2 rate a little bit. And then once we have a sound that we like, we can just reduce the intensity of the effect by bringing down the dry wet control here. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, I'd love to invite you to leave a like down below, subscribe if you're new, and if you really enjoy videos and other content like this and want to see more, I'd love you to consider supporting me by heading on over to my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can support me by buying me a coffee, downloading or purchasing some things from my shop, or becoming a member to support me on a monthly basis and getting some other cool things and freebies in the process as well. There'll be a link down below in the description. So obviously we can see that Ableton Live's phaser is really cool for a few different reasons, but one of the reasons that I really like it is the ability for it to follow the envelope of an incoming sound and apply that movement to the center frequency of the phaser. This is really great to add some extra movement to shorter and more percussive sounds, things like maybe that lead sound that we were just working with, maybe some bass wubs or something like that, or of course just standard percussion as well. Let's show you how you can go about doing this in Ableton Live's phaser. So here I have the kind of bass wub sound. Let's go ahead and add a phaser flanger to this sound right after the saturator. And instead of having the LFO move the center frequency of this phaser, I'm going to bring the amount down all the way. So now we can basically tune the phaser with this center frequency control. Let's maybe reduce the spread a little bit. We can maybe increase the notches up to 6. And now I'm going to go over to this little envelope follower section here. And with the envelope follower engaged, I'm just going to either increase or decrease this amount here and have a listen to what it does to the sound. We can hear now the phaser center frequency is moving in time with the sound. If I reduce it, we can now change the speed or the rate of the envelope's movement here with the attack and release controls. Maybe give it a little bit of a slower attack and a little bit of a faster release. We can again change things like the center frequency. And even introduce some feedback into the sound for a more metallic kind of sound. Let's increase the feedback control here. Maybe invert the polarity of the fedback signal. Adjust the envelope a little bit, slower release, faster attack. And maybe adjust the center frequency. And let's again just reduce the intensity of this effect by pulling down the dry wet amount. Without the phaser, and with the phaser. Lastly, as you kind of would have seen at the start of that last example, we can kind of get full control over the phaser by automating its different parameters, such as the center frequency, the number of notches, the feedback, the spacing, all that kind of stuff. And this is really useful for adding precise movement to a sound, which is great for moments of transition or maybe turnarounds in things like percussive sounds or even synths or basses or effects as well. So here I have a drum break sound. If you want to grab that sound, it's actually a part of my free drum breaks pack, which you can find over on my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll leave a link down below in the description. But let's add a phaser to this sound. and once again turn down the amount control. And now what I'm going to do is automate a few different parameters on this phaser. Let's right click on the center frequency, show the automation in a new lane. Let's do the same with the notches, show the automation in a new lane, the spread, show the automation in a new lane, and the dry wet, show the automation in a new lane. And now we can automate these different parameters of the phaser towards the end of the sound to create some interesting transitionary effects on this particular drum break. So for instance, let's pull down this dry wet control to just 0%. And now we can automate this dry wet over, say, this second bar here, right click, introduce a sawtooth wave. We can also change this center frequency here from maybe high to low. Maybe we can increase the number of notches here as well to maybe 12 or something, and decrease the spread over this course of time from higher to lower as well. Let's have a listen to what that sounds like. And maybe we can also right click on the feedback, show some automation in a new lane, and increase the feedback just subtly over the course of this transition as well. And maybe let's do the same at the end. Let's copy all this automation with Command and C, paste it into our last bar here, and just adjust this so the feedback's kind of maybe going up then down. Maybe the phaser frequency is going from low to high, and so is the spread going from low to high as well. And let's maybe just adjust the number of notches for this to be, say, 8 instead. So now let's have a listen to these transitions that we've created in this break sound. It's subtle, but it's a really great way to add some more interest and movement to transitions of different sounds or effects in your track. And so hopefully that's given you a few different ideas on how you can use phasers on different sounds and effects in your tracks to create some more movement and interest. Make sure to check out this video right here for some more cool sound design techniques. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you all in the next video.